Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. At AM 630. WMAL.
And launch of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket as NASA turns to the private sector to resupply the International Space Station.
Well, that happened early this morning as space turned the corner from being something that the government handled to something that private corporations are beginning to handle more and more. We wanted to talk about this change in the direction of our space program in this country. And, of course, when we want to do that, we turn to Tom Jones, former astronaut, guy who spent 53 days living and working in space. He was aboard a number of shuttle flights. He wrote a book called Skywalking. Tom Jones, good to have you here on WMAL.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning.
All right, so talk about what happened this morning, this launch of the Dragon capsule atop a Falcon 9, I guess it's a rocket that was built by a company called SpaceX. Who is SpaceX? Right. Who built this rocket, and how are we changing the way we get into space?
Well, SpaceX is one of two companies. The other one is Orbital Sciences right here in Northern Virginia, both under contract to NASA to haul cargo to the space station on privately built rockets. So this is a big shift in strategy for NASA to supply the space station now that the shuttle is retired on these private rockets. And so SpaceX this morning got off to a great start. This is a demonstration to show they can actually arrive at, rendezvous with, and then be grappled and berthed to the space station. So they're carrying a token amount of cargo, but it's a really big step forward in NASA's resupply efforts.
Now, is the plan at some point to actually deliver astronauts to the station using this system?
Yeah, NASA has two programs. One is the cargo, and then it's joined to the crew transport program. And NASA has not only SpaceX, but several other companies that they're providing seed money to develop a reliable and cheap astronaut transport, again, to replace or succeed the space shuttle. And so the astronaut transport program is still 5 years away from flying astronauts. Wow. And that's one of the problems that NASA has, is that it's taking a lot longer than they originally thought.
And why is that?
Crewed spacecraft require a launch escape system. They require higher redundancy or reliability standards. And, of course, you have to have a very bulletproof way of getting the crew back safely to the Earth. So a one-way cargo ship like SpaceX and Orbital are planning doesn't require all those additional systems. And those are more complex, and it takes longer for a novice company to develop.
All right, we're turning to the private sector. Explain to me the business model, how this works. Since NASA's obviously involved in it, there is a partnership. How does it work for the private company? I mean, are they making money off of this? How do they plan on making money off of it in the future if they're not making money off of it now?
Now, this is the real critical question, whether or not these companies can stay in business with NASA as their only customer.
Yeah.
NASA hopes to save money over what the shuttle costs, so they don't want to pay any more than they used to, and they want to pay less, in fact. And SpaceX has said that once they show that they can do work for NASA, they can get other customers to come in and subsidize the cost of launch for the taxpayers. But that's yet to materialize, and so today's launch is a very big step in proving that they've got a viable system. Now they've got to prove that they can actually turn a profit and stay in business.
Now, has SpaceX hired a bunch of former NASA employees?
No, they're quite an interesting startup with a lot of aerospace talent that they've garnered from around the country. There are a few experienced NASA people that are on their payroll, but for the most part they've received technical advice from NASA as part of the payments that NASA has made. But no, they don't have a lot of ex-NASA staffers.
But I mean, really, when you look at how former spacecraft were built, it were big companies like, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas. Those people were the major contractors that NASA turned to. Did those people move over to SpaceX?
No. Again, SpaceX is the sort of the brainchild of Elon Musk, who's the PayPal billionaire, and he has put together his own team, and they have made most of the parts for their rocket, the Falcon 9 and the Dragon, in-house. They do have a few suppliers, and they'll probably have to stretch out a bit now that they're going to go operational. But it's really a very unique company, and it remains to be seen whether he can deliver to his investors, the value that he's promised.
Is there any competition to SpaceX out there?
Well, Orbital Sciences has a parallel cargo contract. Their first test launch will come on the coast of Virginia in August, they think, and they have both contracted for about a dozen flights each for NASA. SpaceX, of course, wants to transform that cargo shipment contract into astronaut transport.
All right, you flew on several space shuttle missions. You were with NASA for, 11 years at least?
11 years.
Are you uneasy with this transition, or do you think this can work? Where do you feel this is going?
I'm a very big fan of the commercial cargo contract because it was obvious that we had to get supplies to the space station on a cheaper basis than the shuttle could provide. I'm very optimistic that they'll do well on this demo. They might not make it all the way to the space station on this flight because there's a complex automated rendezvous that has to happen here, and they can't endanger the space station's safety. On the crew transport side, I think the case still has to be made that they've got the skills to put together a safe and reliable rocket in just a few test flights. And that's why it's going to take 5 more years, and I think it'll probably even take longer than that. And I worry that we're risking the health of the space station while we're relying on the Russians for this transport.
All right. And the other thing that people say is, well, when we lost the shuttle, we lost the heavy lift capability that the shuttle provided. It was a heck of a truck. It was an expensive truck, but it was a truck that got the job done. How long before we get something like that can carry heavy things into space? Because there's a national security concern there.
Yeah, this is a strategic shift, and so NASA's decided to not have a Lamborghini-like truck that can carry astronauts and cargo at the same time. So they split the cargo off from crew transport. So both rockets will then be smaller. And there are big heavy lift commercial vehicles already, like the Delta IV and the Atlas V that launch military and commercial satellites. They can do the cargo job to the space station, along with SpaceX and Orbital. And then for crew transport, you'd build a smaller, reliable ship that just has enough capacity to get the crew to the station in a couple of 3 days. Now, that means we still have to come up with a deep space system to go beyond the space station, and NASA has this Orion spacecraft and a giant booster that it hopes to build. The question is whether the NASA budget will ever pay for those two.
You've been to the space station. What's it like?
Oh, it's an amazing outpost in this vast desert of space. When you go out there and look into the empty black sky and finally see the star that you're approaching, you just realize you're approaching somebody's home. And, 6 of my colleagues are up there right now on the space station, and they're very eager to see the supply line replaced by the commercial companies. I think it's a big plus for them.
All right. Tom Jones, an astronaut who flew how many missions? 4?
4 missions. It was a great privilege.
53 days in space. He's written a book called Skywalking. He has a website. If you want to learn more about him, it's called TomJones.com.